The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air inside Willowbrook Cafe, a popular spot in the city where professionals and college students gathered to start their day. The morning rush was in full swing, with people queuing up, chatting on their phones, or anxiously checking their watches. Behind the counter, Jake, the head clerk, rolled his eyes as he handed a cappuccino to a sharply dressed woman in a power suit. She smiled and dropped a crisp $5 bill into the tip jar. Jake's mood brightened instantly. "Thank you so much. Have a great day," he beamed. As the line inched forward, the cafe door creaked open, and a man in ragged clothes shuffled inside. His beard was unkempt, his hair tangled, and his oversized coat looked like it had seen better days, long ago. He clutched a few crumpled dollar bills in his trembling hands and approached the counter. The moment Jake spotted him, his expression darkened with disgust. Excuse me, sir," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I think you're in the wrong place." The man blinked. I just want a coffee." Jake let out an exaggerated sigh, loud enough for the other customers to hear. "We don't serve your kind here," he scoffed. "Go beg somewhere else." The cafe went silent. A few customers turned to look, some in pity, others in embarrassment. The man's face flushed red, but he didn't argue. Instead, he quietly reached into his pocket and placed a $100 bill on the counter. Jake's smirk faltered. "I said, I just want a coffee," the man repeated, his voice calm but firm. Jake hesitated, his eyes flickering between the cash and the man's disheveled appearance. Who carries that kind of money around if they're homeless? The cafe patrons watched with curiosity. Something about this situation didn't add up. What they didn't know was that this homeless man was actually a millionaire. And today, he was about to teach Jake a lesson he'd never forget. Jake glanced at the $100 bill once more, feeling the heat of a dozen eyes on him. His fingers twitched. He wanted to take the money, to shove it in the register, and be done with this nuisance. But something was off. He had a sinking feeling that he was missing something. The man before him didn't look like someone who was truly down on his luck. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jake asked, eyeing the man with a mixture of suspicion and disgust. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply slid the bill closer, his eyes locking with Jake's. "You're going to refuse me a coffee?" he asked softly, almost calmly. Jake opened his mouth to retort, but he was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the line. A few customers had started whispering amongst themselves, their gazes flickering between Jake and the man. The weight of the situation was growing heavy, and Jake could feel his nerves tightening. He wasn't going to back down, though. He was the head clerk, and he had the right to run his cafe however he liked. "Listen, you've got to leave," Jake said, his voice more forceful now. "This place isn't for people like you." The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a chilling silence filled the cafe. Then he straightened up and looked Jake dead in the eyes. "You really want to know who I am?" the man asked. His voice was low, but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. Jake narrowed his own eyes. What was this guy playing at? He scoffed. "Yeah, sure. You're just another beggar trying to get a free ride." The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was the kind of smile that sent a wave of unease through Jake's chest. "All right," the man said, pushing his coat aside to reveal a sleek, expensive watch on his wrist. "I'll show you exactly who I am." At that moment, he reached into his coat and pulled out a well-worn business card, one that looked oddly out of place among his filthy clothes. He handed it to Jake. Jake took the card, inspecting it with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. It read, "Martin Street, Claire, CEO of St. Clair Industries, founder and investor." Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. This man was a CEO? The cafe was silent. Even the other customers were frozen, unsure of how to react. Martin gave a dry chuckle, watching Jake's face shift from disbelief to embarrassment. "That's right," he said softly. "I'm not the one you think I am. And this little scene you're making will cost you." Jake stood frozen, staring at the card in his hand. The weight of the situation hit him like a freight train. He had just insulted a man who wasn't only well-dressed beneath the grime, but was also a high-powered CEO, a millionaire who could destroy him in an instant if he wanted to. For a split second, everything around him seemed to fade out of focus. The whirring of the coffee machine, the low murmur of the other customers, all of it seemed distant. He glanced up, his face burning with shame. Martin was standing there, his posture calm, but his gaze sharp, piercing even. "I think you've made a mistake," Martin said. His tone wasn't angry, but there was an edge to it that Jake couldn't ignore. I didn't know," Jake stammered, suddenly feeling small. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." But Martin held up a hand, silencing him. "Apologies don't change the situation. You've already embarrassed me in front of these people." Jake's stomach dropped. How had it come to this? Martin continued, his voice lowering with authority. "I've been in this game long enough to know how people like you think. You see someone who's not in your class, not in your circle, and you think they're nothing more than a nuisance, a problem to deal with, not a person to respect." Jake wanted to say something, but his throat had tightened. He'd always prided himself on his position in life, his job, his routine. It had never occurred to him that judging others so harshly would have consequences. Martin's eyes softened slightly, and he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You see, Jake, this is about more than just a cup of coffee or the money. It's about recognizing the value in people, no matter who they are or how they present themselves." Jake felt like a fool. He had judged Martin based on his outward appearance, assuming that someone who didn't look polished or well-groomed couldn't possibly be someone of significance. Martin took a slow breath, his gaze unwavering. "So here's the deal, Jake," he said, his voice now cool and even. "You've got two choices. You can keep going on with your life, treating others with the same disrespect, or you can learn something today that might change your entire perspective." Jake's heart raced, his mind spinning. This wasn't just about a coffee anymore. It was about learning something bigger than himself, something that could reshape his life and career forever. Martin wasn't done. "I'm not just going to let you off with a lecture. Number, I'm going to give you a chance to show me that you're more than just another arrogant, rude clerk." Jake swallowed hard. "What do you want me to do?" Martin smiled, but this time it was different. It was a smile of calm resolve. "I want you to spend the rest of the day in my shoes. I want you to serve this cafe for the rest of the shift. No pretending to be the boss, no getting out of it. You serve, you clean, you treat these customers the way you should have treated me from the start." Jake stared at Martin, unsure whether he should laugh or refuse outright. But when he looked into Martin's eyes, he saw something that made him hesitate. It was that same cool confidence, the unspoken power that came with being a man who knew how to get what he wanted. "Do we have a deal?" Martin asked, already holding out his hand for a handshake. Jake, for the first time that day, realized that this wasn't just about humiliation. It was about growth. He hesitated for a long moment, then, with a deep breath, shook Martin's hand. "Yes, I'll do it." Jake was not prepared for how humbling it would be. The cafe was bustling with activity as the clock ticked past noon. The line at the counter had grown, and the customers' chatter filled the air. But instead of standing behind the register like he had earlier in the day, he now found himself behind the counter, prepping orders, serving drinks, and cleaning up spills. The first few minutes felt like an eternity. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being on the other side, being the one who had to rush to make sure everyone was happy, to smile when a customer was rude or demanding, to deal with the chaos. His hands shook a little as he poured a cup of coffee. His clothes, now covered with the cafe's stains, feeling more uncomfortable than ever. It was as if every move he made was under a magnifying glass. The first customer approached the counter, and Jake forced a smile. "What can I get you?" A woman in her early 40s, with a sharp and impatient tone, snapped her fingers. "I want a caramel macchiato and don't make it slow. I'm in a hurry." Jake nodded, trying to hide the frustration in his chest. He could feel the old arrogance rising, the voice in his head telling him to just roll his eyes, to show his displeasure. But something stopped him. He glanced back at Martin, who was sitting quietly at a corner table, observing the scene. The man had been silent but watchful all morning, allowing Jake to make his own decisions, to come to his own realizations. Jake bit his lip and fought against the impulse. Instead of making a sarcastic remark or showing impatience, he simply nodded. "Of course. I'll have it right out." He worked diligently, carefully making the coffee just as the woman had asked. When he handed it over, the woman barely acknowledged him, taking her drink without a thank you. For a moment, Jake felt the sting of rejection, the same way Martin must have felt earlier. He tensed, but then it hit him. This was his chance. This wasn't about the coffee. It was about showing respect. As the hours wore on, Jake found himself interacting with all types of customers, impatient, rude, but also kind and understanding. He saw the way some of the regulars smiled at him when he handed over their drinks, the way others showed appreciation with a simple "thank you." But there was one interaction that stuck with him. A middle-aged man, well-dressed and soft-spoken, ordered a cappuccino. Jake had just finished brewing it when the man asked, "Is it all right if I sit here for a while?" Jake nodded. "Of course, take your time." The man sat down and after a moment looked up from his book. "You've been doing this for a while, haven't you?" Jake chuckled lightly, wiping his hands on his apron. "About an hour, actually." The man raised an eyebrow. "You're new." Jake paused. "I'm just helping out today. It's a long story." The man smiled knowingly, his expression kind but curious. "Well, if I may say, you're doing a good job. A lot of people would have crumbled under the pressure by now." Jake's chest swelled a little. He hadn't expected to hear that. "Thanks," he said quietly. The man leaned in, lowering his voice. "And don't let the rude ones get to you. They're usually the ones with the most baggage. You're doing something a lot of people can't do. Serve with kindness. Keep that in mind." Jake nodded, feeling genuinely grateful for the man's words. They didn't just help in the moment. They helped him realize something deeper about his journey. Being of service wasn't about getting something in return. It was about showing empathy and understanding. As the day wore on, the cafe's energy began to shift. Jake started moving more confidently, interacting with customers with a genuine warmth he didn't know he had. The moments that had felt like the hardest ones now seemed more like challenges he could conquer. And Martin, from across the room, watched the transformation silently. As the final hour approached, Jake could see the cafe slowing down. The late afternoon light streamed in through the windows, casting a golden hue over everything. He wiped down the counter one last time, looking at the mess of cups, napkins, and receipts in front of him. It had been a long day, but he felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in a long time. Martin stood up from his seat, signaling that it was time. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, walking over to him. "I think I've learned what you were trying to teach me." Martin smiled, but it wasn't a patronizing smile. It was a knowing smile. "I'm glad to hear that. How do you feel?" Jake's smile was genuine now, not forced. "I feel like I'm seeing things for what they really are. Not just in the cafe, but in the way I treat people. The way I treat myself, too." Martin nodded, clearly pleased. "Good. Humility is a hard lesson, but it's the kind that stays with you." Jake took a deep breath, looking around the cafe. It wasn't glamorous or rich, but it was real. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. "It's going to change the way I see things from now on." Jake's shift ended, and he stood behind the counter, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. It wasn't just the exhaustion of a long day. It was a deeper, more profound shift inside. He had seen the world differently through the lens of this humble cafe, through the eyes of the people who had served him, the ones who had struggled and worked hard for every penny. He walked to the back of the cafe, where Martin had been sitting for the past few hours, watching Jake's transformation quietly. He approached the table, feeling a sudden sense of nervousness. "I think I've learned the lesson," Jake said quietly, his voice full of uncertainty. "I understand what you were trying to show me, but I still feel like there's more I need to learn." Martin nodded, closing the book he'd been reading. He looked at Jake with the same calm, thoughtful expression that had been present from the beginning. "You've come a long way. But it's not just about what you've learned today. It's about the journey ahead." Jake's heart raced. What did Martin mean? Was there more to his lesson? Was this just the beginning? Martin paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Jake, I'm going to tell you something that may surprise you. I'm not just an ordinary customer who happened to be here today. I'm someone who has been watching you for a while." Jake's mind raced. What did that mean? How could Martin have been watching him? He was just a regular guy who'd been living a selfish life for so long. What had he missed? "I'm a business owner," Martin continued, his voice low. "Not just any business. I run a multi-million-dollar tech company." Jake's mouth went dry. His mind struggled to process the words. "Wait, what? You're a billionaire?" Martin nodded, his eyes gleaming with a calm confidence. "Yes, but that's not important. What's important is that I wanted to understand who you are as a person, not just a man with money, but a man with heart." Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. "You've been watching me?" "I've been observing you," Martin said, "for months. I've seen how you've treated others, how you've treated yourself. I've seen how blind you were to the things that truly matter. But today, I saw something different." Jake swallowed hard. "So, what does this mean? Why are you telling me this?" Martin smiled. "Because I see potential in you. I see someone who could lead, not just with money, but with integrity. And I want to offer you something." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. What could he offer me? He was just an ordinary guy who had been too focused on himself to care about anything else. "Jake, I want to offer you the opportunity to join my company, not just as an employee, but as a partner. I want you to be a part of something bigger than yourself, to help shape the future, to lead with the kind of humility and compassion you've shown today." Jake's jaw dropped. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't just an offer. It was a chance to completely redefine his life. "You're serious?" Jake asked, his voice trembling with disbelief. "You want me to join your company?" Martin nodded. "I see something in you that a lot of people miss. You don't just have the skills to succeed. You have the heart. You've learned the most important lesson of all. People matter more than anything else." Jake felt the weight of those words sink in. He'd spent years focused on his own success, on building his wealth and power. But he had never considered how his actions affected others. Now, he realized, the real power came from helping others rise, not just pulling yourself up. "I don't know what to say," Jake whispered, overwhelmed. "I've been so caught up in my own world I didn't see it. But I see it now. I see what's important." Martin smiled, standing up from his chair. "It's never too late to change, Jake. You have a chance now to do something good, to build something meaningful." Jake looked at the man in front of him, his mind still reeling from the revelation. For the first time in a long time, He felt a sense of purpose, something deeper than just wealth or success. He felt as if he had been given a second chance. Martin extended his hand, and Jake hesitated for only a second before shaking it firmly. "Welcome to the team," Martin said, his eyes gleaming with the promise of a new future. Jake smiled, the weight of his transformation finally settling into place. He had learned something today that would stay with him forever. True success wasn't about how much money you made or how many people you could control. It was about helping others rise with you. Jake stood in the small, quiet office space, the hum of computers and soft chatter from nearby colleagues filling the air. It was his first day working alongside Martin's team, and it felt surreal. Just a few weeks ago, he had been a self-centered businessman, focused solely on profit and self-preservation. Now, he was part of something much bigger. The transformation was dizzying, but it felt right. He had a purpose now, a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for so long. Martin had introduced Jake to several members of the team, many of whom were surprised at his humble beginnings. They had all heard the story of the homeless man and the lessons Jake had learned in that short time, but they had yet to witness the change within him. As Jake settled into his new role, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey he'd taken, the pride and arrogance he had carried with him for years, the disconnect from reality he had lived in, and the harsh lesson that had turned everything around. He had gone from mocking those in need to understanding their struggles, from a man obsessed with his own success to someone who truly wanted to make a difference in the lives of others. Jake's thoughts were interrupted when his phone buzzed. It was a text from his old friend, Ben, a fellow entrepreneur. Ben had been one of the few people who knew Jake's real nature before he made his transformation. "Ben. Hey man, how's it going? Heard you're working for Martin now. Can't believe it. What happened to all the big money plans?" Jake stared at the message for a moment, a wry smile spreading across his face. How could he explain this to someone like Ben? How could he put into words that he had found something better than the hollow pursuit of wealth? He typed back quickly, "Jake, everything's changing, Ben. Money's not the goal anymore. I'm learning a whole new way of doing business, and it feels right." There was a pause before Ben replied, "Ben, that's insane. I can't believe you've gone soft. You were always about the hustle, the grind. What happened?" Jake's smile faded slightly as he considered the question. What had happened? Was he really going soft? Had he abandoned the drive that had once pushed him to succeed? The answer came to him quickly. No, he hadn't gone soft. He had simply grown up. He had learned that success was no longer just about personal gain, but about using his abilities to uplift others. He had seen firsthand how compassion and humility could unlock doors that power and wealth never could. Jake put the phone down and leaned back in his chair, gazing out the window. The sky was clear, and the city sprawled out beneath him, a blend of towering glass buildings and neighborhoods that reminded him of where he had come from. The realization hit him hard. He had been blind to all of this. The people, the lives, the opportunities for real, meaningful change. He had been too focused on winning. As his thoughts wandered, Martin entered the room, a knowing smile on his face. "How's it going, Jake?" he asked, his voice full of warmth. "I'm still getting the hang of it," Jake replied, offering a shy smile in return. "But I'm starting to understand the bigger picture. It's not just about business. It's about how we build something that actually helps people."
Martin nodded, his eyes glinting with pride. "That's the spirit. It's why I brought you on. You have what it takes, Jake. You just needed to open your eyes." Jake leaned forward, suddenly full of determination. "I want to make a difference. I want to help others like I helped that woman on the street. I want to show that success doesn't just come from a paycheck. It comes from connection, from building a community." Martin's smile widened, and he gave Jake a hearty clap on the back. That's exactly the vision we have here. We're changing the world, one person at a time, and you're going to be a big part of that. Jake nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. He had left behind the world of ego-driven competition and stepped into a new world. A world where the value of human connection far outweighed the value of a dollar. That Jake's journey was just beginning. As he continued to work with Martin and the rest of the team, he realized that every day brought new opportunities to teach and to learn. The lessons he had once overlooked, like compassion, humility, and integrity, had become his guiding lights. He had transformed from a man who thought success was a solo endeavor into a leader who knew the importance of collaboration, supporting others, and building a legacy that would last long after the money ran out. The change was undeniable, and with every passing day, Jake knew that he was becoming the man he had always wanted to be, the kind of man who truly made a difference in the world.